What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kryptonian saying here, bringing you guys another review for Chainsaw Man Chapter 98, also known as Chainsaw Man Part 2 Chapter 1. And first things first, this chapter is a hell of a reminder that Chainsaw Man greatness is picking up exactly where it left off, because we're getting all that magic that we have from Chainsaw Man Part 1, but we're also seeing that Fujimoto ain't too bad when it comes to foreshadowing himself, because in this chapter we learn about the War Devil, and if you go back to what Makima was saying in Part 1 of Chainsaw Man, you see that this was already foreshadowed. The concept of nuclear weapons, according to Makima, was erased by Denji, but the War Devil is shown to actually know about them. Even though that Makima says she's forgetting some names despite her power of control, and even though she says she's the only one that seems to remember, the War Devil remembers nuclear weapons, and that's why the War Devil at the end of the chapter says that she's going to make Chainsaw Man, i.e. Denji, actually throw up the nuclear weapons right here. I love that we're seeing those little bits of connective tissue like this. So the chapter opens up in a classroom setting with a headless chicken named Bucky, who the teacher of the classroom says are gonna keep the devil as their pet for 100 days before they kill and eat Bucky, with the intention for the classroom students to learn how truly precious life is, which is some very sick and twisted foreshadowing for the huge theme of this chapter, which is that life is very fleeting. Life can be gone at any moment. And it's at that point that our heroine of the story, Mitaka, is actually shown to us, and given how things are shaping up, she might actually be the future antagonist once the story shifts back over to Denji, because this chapter right here was definitely a parallel to Chainsaw Man Chapter 1. However, whereas that chapter was about Denji's origin story as a hero, we're actually seeing Mitaka's origin story as an antagonist. I love that. Personally, I hope they continue on this route, but we'll have to see what Fujimoto and his editors decide to do. So right away, the contrast we see is between Mitaka and her other classmates. She's super resentful. Her internal monologues are downright nasty. At one point, she's telling a happy couple to just drop dead. It's brilliant for the setup for the plot twist at the end of the chapter, where Fujimoto decides to tie everything that we've seen in this chapter together in a very neat bow. Figuratively, even though technically it's a very messy blow, given how much guts and blood sheds at the end of the chapter. What I love about this setup is that we see how Mitaka's a lot darker and more bitter than her classmates, but we also see that she has a darker past than her classmates because her parents were eaten by a devil. So the idea of keeping a devil as a pet classroom animal isn't something she's too high on. However, when she's on top of the school rooftop, she's alone and isolated from her classmates. All of a sudden, that's when the class president shows up, which is again more foreshadowing for the twist at the end of the chapter. We've gone from this chapter where she's been alone and angry to learning why Mitaka is the way she is, to getting what appears to be a ray of hope that things will actually be different for her, because the class president seems to be trying to make friends with her. But like any good Chainsaw Man reader knows, you know that good feelings aren't something that you should get attached to, because that's something that Chainsaw Man showed us with Power in Part 1, where she learned the hard way when she bought Denji a birthday cake and Makima pulled out one of the most savage kills in Part 1 of Chainsaw Man. When the story points out that the class president is eating a sandwich and that it has the Chainsaw Man sticker on it, it's more twisted foreshadowing. The class president is eating a meal with a Chainsaw Man sticker on it while speaking to a girl whose parents were eaten by a devil. Chainsaw Man is a devil that eats other devils. It's twisted and it's a beautiful setup, especially when the heroine tells the class president that the society is corrupted, where the mayor has a DUI and there's a devil running around pretending to be a devil hunter, and she doesn't exactly hide that she's not a fan of the classroom keeping a pet devil, which again is more subtle foreshadowing for the setup at the end of the chapter, where we learn our sweet beloved teacher was having sex with his student, and that same student has a contract with the Justice Devil. Talk about ironic. And we find out that Mitaka actually ends up getting saved by the War Devil when Mitaka is about to die. Very brilliant artistic setup right here. While it's easy to look at all this foreshadowing on how these interactions are used for the big plot twist where the class president turns out to have that devil contract, we can't not talk about how insane the world building is that's going on right here, because we're firmly rooted in a post-Chainsaw Man world in the sense that Chainsaw Man is more celebrated than ever before. We're seeing that it doesn't have to just be devil hunters who are making contracts with devils, because the class president has made a contract with a devil as well. Chainsaw Man now has its own meat sandwich that has collectible stickers that people get, which is an absolute mad lad of a thing to do, and I love seeing it, because while we see some love for devils in the praise for Chainsaw Man, we as readers know what Angel said in part 1 of Chainsaw Man, which is that for the most part, devils want the deaths of human. It's setting up part 2 to be even more cruel and twisted than part 1 was, and I'm all for it, especially when we see that devil contracts are going to be getting formed with more humans that aren't necessarily devil hunters. So moving back to the second act of the manga chapter, we got more foreshadowing where Mitaka says that she wishes Bucky and Chainsaw Man will hurry up and die before the chapter ends. We see that she's actually accidentally killed Bucky, and at the end of the chapter, once she's made that connection with the War Devil, she's on a collision course with Denji, aka Chainsaw Man. I love seeing that, and I love how Fujimoto just milked Bucky's character by giving us that beautifully drawn montage where you see much of the class beginning to fall in love with them before he does two things. One, he has the class vote to not kill Bucky, and then in typical Chainsaw Man fashion, Fujimoto has Bucky end up dying in a very brutally drawn scene where we see the dead body. Even if it was done by, apparently by mistake, by Asa Mitaka, we do know that the class president was the one that tripped her on purpose so as to actually kill Bucky. Great underhanded moment right there. Now, Mitaka also takes a few nights to get herself together. She hears a knock on the door, and she's told by the class president that she and the teacher want to take her to Bucky's grave. And you see more of that twisted humor because the teacher and the class president are telling her that they could go to the grave and apologize to Bucky, and that Bucky, a devil, will actually hear them in heaven. I love seeing that. I laugh my ass off on it. And it's here we start to see the tone of the story shift when Mitaka refuses to cross the crosswalk until it's safe to do so, which leads to the class president calling her out for, quote, being a goody two-shoes. And it's our first sign that things are different here when we look at the expressions that are on the page, because when the class president gets called Prez, notice in the actual text there's a question mark. It's our clear sign as readers that this was out of character to a major extent. That's more subtle foreshadowing right there. It's at that point that the foreshadowing is paid off because she transforms into a devil, and as she does so, we learn that Mr. Tanaka was the one who told the class president to befriend Mitaka, and it goes even further when we learn that Mr. Tanaka was sleeping with the class president and is also interested in Mitaka, which, as a side note, Mr. Tanaka was collecting the panties the same way that Thanos was collecting Infinity Stones. It's at this point we learn that the class president made that contract with the Justice Devil, and what I like about this is that, again, we're seeing contracts are now being made with devils by the run-of-the-mill average person now. The class president is a normal girl who made a contract with a devil, which is low-key insane because, again, this is not a devil hunter. This is a normal teenage girl. It's at that point that Mitaka sees flashes before her eyes as the class president attacks her, and she starts to feel relief knowing that she didn't actually kill Bucky, but we also see that as she's dying with regrets, which is a very interesting choice here thematically. So up until this point, we've only seen the more dark and brooding side of her, but now we see that Mitaka wishes that she would have made more friends. She wishes that she would have done more of the things she wanted to. She wishes that she would have been more selfish. Now that her life is ending, regret, a natural human emotion, is running through her mind, and I love how that's used as a transition to the devil that is now offering to allow her to live in exchange for giving up her body because she's in such a desperate situation. At that point, after she agrees to give up her body to the War Devil, she grabs Mr. Tanaka by the hair and she rips out his spinal cord in a brutal fashion, and she uses his fucking spinal cord as a sword, which is absolutely insane. It's one of the best creative shots that we've had in the manga so far. Mitaka, now known as the War Devil, proceeds to go right after the class president in an absolute one-sided slaughter fest, and it's so creative as the fight goes on. We see Mitaka cut off the class president's hand, utter the words hand grenade, and it literally becomes a grenade, which is why we can draw a pretty clear line right here. The War Devil appears to be able to make weapons of war when it has its hands on body parts. Even more creative is how we get this twisted scene where Mitaka cuts off the class president's head, and her head falls over and she kisses the severed head of Mr. Tanaka. I love this scene because it does two things. One, it pays off the line about the class president making the contract with the Justice Devil in a very ironic fashion, because both the pedophile teacher and the class president are now dead, and we see them share a post-death kiss, which is absolutely hilariously brutal. Fujimoto then takes the trolling even further by having Mitaka say that she's gonna give them a happy ending, and she proceeds to throw the hand grenade over her shoulder and blow up everything, which leads to the second thing I love here, which is that absolutely beautiful shot where Mitaka is walking away and you got all these blood and guts coming from the explosion. Very beautiful. So I like how after that we see that Mitaka sees the Chainsaw Man meet up on the poster, and she declares that she's going to make Chainsaw Man vomit up nukes. I'm loving what we're getting right here. The biggest thing is that even without being in the chapter, we feel Denji and Makima's presence here. Denji is more in your face with the Chainsaw Man stickers and posters. Makima is a more subtle way when it comes to a war devil, and it's something that's meant to just kind of prod the minds of readers. It feels like we're potentially getting the four horsemen of devils, because Makima stated that things like Nazis and AIDS and nukes all existed at one point, and they were every bit as feared as the devils with their names, but she's the only one that seemingly remembers them. This is a clear four horsemen of devils that's being set up, and I love how the war devil Mitaka is now one of the driving factors in the story. This was a very brilliantly done chapter, a hell of a return for Fujimoto for Chainsaw Man Part 2. Makima clearly said death, war, and hunger in Part 1, and it's no mistake that we have a devil that's named after war. And you also have Kabune's devil, which might very well be the hunger devil, because she was keeping it a secret and giving Makima's wording. It makes perfect sense why she would want to keep that a secret. Again, hell of an intro chapter. I'm curious to know what you guys thought about it. Why you think about that? Consider watching these other videos you see on the screen right now.